So I'm going to move us into our first session and welcome to the stage our three panelists, Stefan, Dicle, and Matt. And I suggest that that I hand over to you to introduce yourselves in that order. Stefan, if you could go first.
Sure, thanks, Jennifer. So my name's Stefan Williams. I'm a professor of robotics at the University of Sydney, and also lead the Digital Sciences Initiative, which is an initiative bringing together research in digital sciences from across the university.
Hi, my name is Dicle Kortantamer. I'm a lecturer in project management at the University of Leeds. I specialize on project leadership, and my background is computer science and information systems.
And my name is Matt Gijselman. That's how you pronounce that. I am with Bentley Systems. I work across the Asia-Pacific region on advancing infrastructure intelligence and looking at how we can deliver infrastructure in a more technologically effective means.
Great. And one thing I forgot to tell the participants is that please do put your questions for our panelists into the Q&A, and you can thumb up and thumb down. Well, I think you can thumb up questions, and so as questions rise to the top, then I will use them. But I wanted to really start off, Stefan, by asking you, what's exciting? What are the exciting areas of data science and AI?
Well, I mean, you hear a lot about it in the news, but things like large language models, generative AI, these sorts of tools, which are really starting to show ability to what looks like understand text, to summarize data, bring that together in a way that really pulls together relationships in both language, in written text, but also extracting meaning from imagery. These are all really exciting tools that are being deployed across a broad range of different activities, from construction, supply chain logistics. We do a lot of work in mining automation, and increasingly all of those fields are really exploiting innovation in AI and machine learning to help or to produce tools that help people in making complex decisions. And I think being able to pull all kinds of different data together to facilitate better decision making, I think is something that will transform a variety of different industry sectors, including in project management.
Matt, did you want to come in on that?
So many thoughts. Look, I think so. I suppose I should say at the outset, obviously there'll be a range of project management experiences on the call today. So, I'm coming mostly from a position of infrastructure and construction. So, let me just sort of say that up front. Look, I think that's exactly right, and there really is a lot of interesting tools that are being deployed now. I suppose the one thing I really tip my hat to, Stefan, as you went along, which is, these sorts of tools looking like they are understanding what they're doing. We can, I'm sure, get into this as the conversation goes along. But the one thing I would note is that, the thing that excites me, Jennifer, is we really are at the very beginning, for all that's said and for all the incredible technology that's out there, and we will, I'm sure, go through a lot of it in the course of this conversation. The reality is that, much of the industry is, slowly working through implementation. We all probably on this call are in the hype cycle, the Gartner hype cycle, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the industry is. And so that, looking at it one way, I think that provides an enormous opportunity for us as we sort of go forward in the sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had lots of conversations, Stefan and Matt on also kind of the formats of data, and maybe we can come back to that and the kind of challenges that poses for AI. Dicle, I wanted to just sort of bring you into the conversation and ask you, how AI, changes our understanding of project leadership. It's quite a big question, but I wonder if you could kind of talk to that.
Sure. As Matt said, I think we're at the beginning of this journey. And so far, when I look around, I don't see a big change in terms of people still talking about the project manager as the main source of leadership in projects. And the main conversation, there's been a recent paper in Harvard Business Review as well, is around replacing the managerial tasks so that the project manager has more time for leadership in terms of coaching, stakeholder management, which I think is only the tip of the iceberg. If we kind of look around what's happening, and I've been doing a bit of reading as well. For example, Kyoto University has lately been working on 20,000 scenarios for the future and trying to understand the divergence of when, the Japanese society will no longer be able to move towards sustainability. And I think it's those kind of cutting edge opportunities where kind of leadership can play a bigger role if we view leadership as, value creation and future making in those kind of terms, not just the control of projects. So I think and if you look at NASA, they've been doing quite a lot on this in this space as well, where I think offers opportunities for really extending our leadership acts to become more valuable and contribute to the value creation process. For example, they've delivered new designs that are lighter in a much faster speed. So I think, it could really open up opportunities for productivity, and similar to what Stefan and Matt was saying, in terms of optimizing supply chains. There are lots of examples out there, but I think we also need to be careful because leadership is always viewed as a neutral objective doing the best thing, and AI kind of is also viewed as that it's got an aura of objectivity with that data. But, as we've all kind of seen, and I was playing with ChatGPT last week where it said I've falsified all this information in the classroom to all my students, and everyone kind of looked. I think we need to be careful about that, as well as the ethical kind of issues that might arise from the biases that are reproduced from that data. And I guess lastly, I don't want to talk too long, but there is, I think, still that kind of view also out there that if roles kind of start getting replaced by AI, we're looking at followers who are AI, which means that it's no longer about charisma and motivation, that kind of stuff in our relationships, leadership relationships, but more about ethical and moral mentoring of those kind of AI followers. And I also want to pose the question, can AI be the leader if we're looking at leadership as an influence relationship, which is a conversation I don't think has started yet. And what does that mean?
Yeah, Dicle, I think you've raised lots of interesting questions in that conversation, and I'm sure there are some questions that are posed that the audience might want to come back to on that as well. Matt, I can see you trying to get into the conversation here. Is there something you want to say to this?
So I was reading look, I'll lay this and then I'll go into something else, which is I was reading an interesting article literally in the last couple of days that was talking about, is AI the death of the PMO? Do you actually need, like, what does a PMO do? It sort of collates information, looks for, themes, produces reports, all the other things that PMOs do as well. But, fundamentally, are those particular jobs even sort of required to have a PMO, and what does the sort of an AI do with that? But, the way I would kind of look at it is, I think, and, just to sort of toe the company line just for a moment, and Bentley's view is, engineers in particular are not going to be replaced by AI. There's always things that are going to sort of need humans, and possibly by the time those are famous last words, I'll be doing something else. But I think what AI does do is potentially moves that window of leadership kind of just a step further out. So, you know, if 20 years ago you were, you know, trying to draw up templates to collect data off disparate projects in the PMO, well, you know, probably 10 years ago, you kind of stopped doing that. You know, if what you're doing now is, you know, preparing board reports and looking at, you know, risk registers, you know, in 10 years' time, maybe you're doing something that's a further step back. And so I think that's sort of one way of looking at it. And I know that we'll get into sort of data issues in a moment, but the other point I wanted to make is, you know, there's 0% unemployment in construction, kind of effectively. Certainly in Australia, you know, there's 100,000 jobs in infrastructure that will literally never be filled. And so, you know, that comes back to, you know, in the context of AI, you know, in everything else that is, in everything else that we are doing, whether that's from driving a car to playing an Xbox to, you know, clearly using your phone, but, you know, to opening the fridge, you know, there is, you know, infrastructure intelligence, or should I say AI intelligence, machine learning, et cetera, behind that. And, you know, the project management profession and, you know, in my case, the infrastructure project management sector, you know, has a long way to go, I think, in terms of how it can look at, you know, practical applications of AI. And again, I come back to, you know, that means that there's lots of opportunity. That means there's lots of things to do. But in the same breath, you know, we just, I think, need to be tempered in terms of what we're expecting, you know, this year versus what, you know, we could see in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting what you say about the hype cycle, Matt, and you know, the short term, medium term, and long term. You know, and often in universities we're playing in that medium term to long term space. You know, sometimes with these new technologies, because everyone's so busy talking about them, it can be hard to recognise that there's still a lot of need for research and development and you know, build out of the technology. And Stefan, I wonder if you wanted to reflect on anything that's come up in the conversation already. You know, I'm aware that we discussed some of these things in the kind of agendas over the last few days.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one of the things I think about in terms of AI and some of the tools that are being presented is that they are tools, and, you know, they can be used to enhance skill. So, you know, we've been working in mining automation, for example, for 15 or 20 years. And the conversation really started out as, well, how can we present data more effectively, you know, in the mine environment to managers to help really manage these enormous projects. And, you know, you can look at it from an individual vehicle automation project all the way through to, you know, the full production process that goes into mining, and each part can be enhanced with, you know, the right tools. And early on, a lot of the work on sort of the AI and the sensing was to kind of aid operators in driving big trucks. If we'd sort of gone into that conversation saying, oh, we want automation and, you know, we'll build autonomous vehicles, that conversation would have stopped pretty quickly. But as you started to introduce these tools, then you start to realize that actually, you know, the person, you know, who's driving the truck is getting all this, you know, their skill is increasing because they're presented with additional information. I think in this kind of project management space, you can imagine, you know, people without experience of running these big projects being presented with more effective data and with more effective tools to help wade through what's happening across big programs, and having their kind of skill level increased as a consequence of being more aware of what's going on across some of these projects earlier on, maybe being able to flag those projects. And I guess I was just going to sort of reflect on the fact that today here in Australia, the government just announced they're cancelling 50 high risk projects with an anticipated saving of order $7 billion. And there's questions about, what was the merit of those projects, the strategy, the ability to deliver value from those projects. And I guess there's a question of, should they even have got to that point where now some years on, they're looking at making some savings. So helping people with the planning, the presentation, the preparation of projects, tracking those projects while they're underway. And then I think the sort of, I guess the debrief at the end, the reflection on what went wrong, what can we learn? I think there's a lot of data there that probably sits in reports and sits in project outcomes documents that isn't exploited then to kind of learn for the next big project, and to provide project leaders with better tools with which to kind of manage the next project. And each of those projects is going to have some unique aspect, but I think there are some fundamental things that carry across big projects.
There are, go on, Matt.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to jump in and note a couple of things, which is one, I think it's interesting that you're talking about, reskilling or upskilling or, additional skilling the truck drivers, but, you can sort of put that across, most sites. And just to sort of note the point, and then we can sort of move on, but, there is a concern, that I don't agree with, but there is a concern that AI is going to kind of come for everyone's jobs, in particular in this space. And as I said, I think that I think we're far from that. But I think one thing it does do is it does actually open up, the sites, the roles, the jobs, to kind of the Xbox generation, for want of a better term, and allow people to sort of see those jobs as not necessarily, those jobs that face the issues that jobs in our sectors sometimes do, without going through all the ins and outs. But I think that it does allow people to sort of see those as more accessible roles, particularly if you've got a base understanding of technology. But what I did want to actually jump on was Stefan's point around taking benefits from one project to the next, and this is where I can kind of very quickly jump on my soapbox for data governance in particular, which is we step back again to, where are we in the process of developing and implementing, AI and even machine learning, I should say, into the sector. And the fundamental point I would make is, we still don't really have a full industry awareness or an acceptance of a data standard, data dictionary, choose your term. And a really good example and a really simple and accessible example that we came across was, once you've handed over the site and you've got teams going back in, looking at in this case it was elevators, are they undertaking an activity, a repair, an operation, or a maintenance? And however you're classifying that has implications for where that particular work is slotted in the project management tool, and who's paying for it. And that's a very simple one, but I think it's a sort of illustrative, which is we're quite sort of far away from being able to pick up the learnings that you have in one project and just sort of moving across to others. Even when, and I'm as guilty as the next person, when we are, touting benefits from digital transformation of, 20% cut in, time and or costs, or whatever, choose your figure. There's a bunch out there, but actually a lot of that's dependent on being able to take those learnings that you've got in project 1 and flowing them through to project 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah, I think some of this conversation starts to get us into those portfolios of projects and how we manage at that level, and understand futures, as we're sort of planning projects. And I think that's a real challenge for governments, and maybe something we can come back to. I want to pick up some of the questions in the chat. Yeah, I still have lots of questions, but let me get into these questions. So Roger Swinburne is asking, I would be interested in understanding how AI may change the qualification of value in major project programs to a more systems and outcomes-based approach to business case and investment value. Yeah, hashtag ESG. I mean, Dicle, do you want to kind of comment on that? I mean, I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think, you know, what we said there about freeing up time to kind of focus on these kind of issues, it's kind of changing the leadership role a little bit. And I think it's turning it towards value creation in projects. And obviously, I think that needs to be reflected in the qualification as well. At the moment, our kind of project leadership training is very much about team leadership. You know, how do you motivate a team? How do you, you know, that's like the main kind of gist of it, and some visioning, but in terms of implementing a vision that's given to us. But as we move more and more towards uncertain kind of conditions, I think, you know, there's a bigger role to play in terms of value creation and kind of figuring out how that will work out as uncertainty unfolds during the project. And I think, yeah, there is a lot to do in terms of reorienting how we train our project managers or anyone else who might contribute to leadership in these major projects as well. I
mean, just before I move on to the next question, because, you know, we're very interested in the way that uncertainty arises and unfolds in projects. I mean, I wonder, you know, I wonder how much AI can help us here, because AI, you know, is kind of being trained on the data we've already got. And if we're wanting to move into new worlds, you know, it's kind of, someone told me that, you know, that it's the biggest plagiarizer, right? It kind of reflects the society you've got at the moment, not necessarily the society you want to move into. I don't know if you have a comment.
I was exactly thinking that as the conversation was unfolding. I think, you know, especially learning from projects or learning within projects, if we're only looking at the past, I think we're kind of limiting ourselves. But I think AI also, as we've touched on earlier, has potential to look into the future. And I think those are also the capabilities we need to explore, so that we've also got some kind of scenarios, foresights, insights, and perhaps, you know, we can use that fast processing power to kind of work through alternative futures and help us guide, navigate that. So I definitely agree. I think a lot of the emphasis has been on the kind of past data, but I think we also need to think about how we connect that to potentialities in the future, and, you know, how we kind of create data around that potential data and guide people who are trying to, especially project managers who are leading this kind of navigation through uncertainty through that.
Yeah, I mean, the next question in a sense kind of connects to this, right? So will AI take over the world? It says, jokes aside, what are the ethical considerations of utilizing AI in the context you're discussing?
Why don't I jump in here, Jennifer? Because I think I don't want to sort of get too specific, but, you know, there is a difference when you're talking about different types of AI. And so if you're looking at you know, an LLM versus a generative, you know, they kind of respond different ways to inputs. But and, you know, I was thinking about NPLAN in the course of the conversation. The last answer, you know, I mean, they, you know, when looking at risks, you know, they have an enormous risk library. They have 740,000 projects, I think they've got now in their machine learning. But fundamentally, they are looking at what has happened before and trying to make assessments based on, you know, parameters for data. And, you know, that is the same here when we're talking about, you know, the ethical implications of AI, the ethical sort of dimensions of AI. You know, it all comes back to an awareness of, you know, how it's being fed. You know, what data is it learning from? And you know, an awareness of bias when looking at that data. you know, if you're trying to, you know, ask the AI system to think about whether or not it should, you know, what's that classic problem, you know, for autonomous vehicles? You know, does it run over a crowd of kids or a grandparent in a wheelchair? Like, you know, I don't know how I would answer that, so I'm not really sure how I'm expecting an AI system to come up with the magic answer. And so I think when looking at it, you know, an awareness of how it's being constructed, you know, and by that I mean the data that's being fed, looking out for biases, but also again not expecting it to solve, you know, the truly moral problems of our time. It may get there, but again, I don't think we're there yet.
I think we have another couple of questions in the chat on this, and I'll kind of run through them and then maybe ask the panel to comment. And Stefan, I know this is an area that we sort of had some conversation around, you know, how you rely on models, you know, about it in the university. But let me run through these questions. So Ian Heppenstall is asking, how do we avoid the risk that AI, ML, LLM learn our bad habits and processes? You know, one view is most of the existing data these models will learn from is based on poor or suboptimal practices. If that's what's learned and then automated, how do we avoid reporting the same wrong data and making the same wrong decisions just faster and with fewer people? And I think in a way, Chris Lawler's question is sort of similar to that. So she's asking, is Gen AI my polite intellectual conversation partner and collaborator, or am I conversing with a biased but clever mimic? You know, where are we at, and where are we going? Can it be the way that PPP manages to explore issues and opportunities? And I wonder, I mean, I've kind of merged those two just because I think they're both dealing with related issues. I wonder if, you know, how do we avoid the risk that AI, ML, LLM learn from our bad habits and processes?
I mean, there's a lot of conversation about sort of trust, you know, and transparency in AI. How do we know how the decisions are being taken by these tools, and, you know, what's actually going in to train them? You know, those large language models are really just taking huge corpuses of text data and learning, you know, what order text typically comes in. And some of the early efforts at sort of deploying chat bots in the wild, you know, ended up with these things that were horribly misogynistic and learned terrible habits and kind of could be driven very quickly into some pretty bad places, and were quickly shut down. You know, I think there's some safeguards that are now putting sort of guardrails that say, you know, these are not the sorts of things that these tools should be espousing, and, you know, there's some careful work goes into the data that's used to train them. I think in terms of the question about, you know, how do they avoid learning our bad habits, part of that is being able to classify when poor decisions have been made, and sort of using that in the training to say, these are poor examples of decision-making processes where things have come out badly as distinct from good. And if you've got enough examples on both sides of the ledger, the idea, I guess, is that the machine learns to distinguish what is characteristic of the good projects as distinct from the ones that have maybe come off the rails.
If I may just quickly add on to that, I think it's also, I totally agree with Stefan, but I want to add, it's also about reflecting on who defines that good and what that is, and that we kind of keep a trace of that and reflect and come back to that as we learn more about the world, because what we think is good might not necessarily be the case in the next situation. And I think it's that kind of continuous journey and just keeping that transparency of the choices we made in defining what we think is good, particularly in terms of leadership, is, I think, that kind of ethical duty of care that we need to kind of continue to have.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think also that a lot of the AI that we've got at the moment is really around schedule or cost, or, you know, around documents. And I wonder, you know, if maybe we could just come back to Chris Lawler's question of, you know, where are we at and where are we going? You know, can it be an opportunity for PP managers to explore issues and opportunities? You know, I think Roger's question right at the beginning was sort of getting at that too, when it was talking about ESG and, you know, and I wonder, you know, if anyone's got any reflection on how AI might be used in that more exploratory way around some of these kind of more future, these kind of emerging issues of sustainability or other things that PPP managers are faced with.
I think, you know, let's be clear, one of the great things about AI is its ability to run scenarios. And I think that, you know, be it in, you know, project planning or risk identification or, you know, any of these other requirements that you know, require scenario operations, is really where AI can kind of step up and step in terms of project management. You know, however, and so what does that do? That in a situation where we can look at it here and predict, you know, that allows project managers to, again, you know, do that higher thinking, for want of a better term. Actually, that's probably not necessarily the way that I would phrase it, but, you know, different thinking in terms of the project. It allows for, you know, increased efficiency on projects, you know, doing more with certainly less people, which is, you know, always needed. But I think, you know, there are some aspects of projects, again, and, you know, I'm trying to sort of think beyond LLM applications to sort of, you know, those wider AI applications, and be that in, you know, sequencing and planning and you know, project, you know, some of those other ways that we're using it. You know, you can't have a, you know, AI tool, and let's sort of pick on GPT because that's always fun. But you can't have, you know, GPT kind of hallucinating how a bridge is going to, you know, be project managed. And so, you know, at this point in time, you know, as we all know, you know, these models do great things. They can be lots of fun, and they, you know, do you know, provide a lot of increased efficiency. But certainly, you know, from where we are now, and they will get better, and I understand that. But certainly from where we are now, you know, you do need that human, you know, final sort of set of eyes and really final brain on these sort of complex, decisions. Because I think, you know, to Stefan's point, which is, you know, having an understanding about what's under the hood is really hard. It's not really going to be the skill set of a project manager, I would imagine. And so, you know, being able to keep an understanding and keep a tight leash on how you're deploying AI, I think is going to be kind of key for the next little while at least.
And I'd suggest that maybe we've been talking a lot about how AI might help people manage projects, but I think another thing to really think about is how project managers need to think about projects that are employing AI tools and sort of the decision making that's happening there and the responsibility and where that comes from. So they gave the example of, you know, managing the building of a bridge. It's entirely feasible that, you know, you might get your civil engineering team out there trying to optimize the design of the bridge, but then you need to really understand, you know, what the implications of the decision that's making. And I think having some fluency in AI, you know, we've talked a little bit about the hype. It's very easy to say, oh, AI is going to solve all our problems. But I think really understanding what those tools can do, what they're capable of, what the limitations are, what the risks are, is important for project managers, you know, business leaders to really understand. And so we've got some programs at the university, and there's many around the world, you know, providing that kind of AI literacy so people can make informed decisions about the use of these tools and what impact they might have. And where the risks inherent in that might be, including, bias and a lot of the other things we've talked about.
And just to bring that full circle, Stefan, as well, which is, and you sort of see, where that's needed when looking at, for example, the infrastructure pipeline that the ministers, you mentioned earlier, has reviewed and released that information today. More, I don't think I need to necessarily go through the ins and outs of this on a project management symposium. More time spent planning at the front means better understanding of costs later on, and deploying technology to enable that means more effective decisions at the back end, and as you go along, and that's certainly something that I think Infrastructure Australia and other similar bodies is something has been sort of banging that drum for quite some time.
Can I pick up another couple of questions? So I mean, there's a comment in the chat, right, which is not really a question, and I think we've sort of covered it, which is that maybe AI can help with analysing possible scenario models, and I think we came on to that discussion. So, but then and actually, I think Ahmed Alfin Afwan is asking, do you think the utilisation of AI in project management will introduce new and unforeseen types of project risks? And I think we've had some discussion of that, but I don't know if there's anything anybody wants to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in, but I think as Stefan and Matt covered, that kind of links into AI literacy as well. I think, most of us lack that literacy. The technology is moving really fast. And obviously, unless you have a detailed understanding of it, it's a bit of a black box. And that by itself, I think, presents significant risks, especially in terms of assuming what this technology might do and relying, on it in that sense. So I think there is definitely something around just making sure we've got the right levels of AI literacy. And that doesn't have to be one person. That doesn't have to be necessarily the project manager. But within the team, that there is enough of that understanding and kind of reflecting on, I think that is required, because, it might also bring other risks. If we think from a leadership perspective, motivation, if people think their jobs might go, there might be resistance to change. This is like any other transformation, depending on how fast you go. There might be other implications of, not everyone might view this positive, and therefore the other human behaviors might come into play that then people in leadership positions would need to cope with actively or proactively even.
Yeah, so we're sort of coming towards the end of the session, but Dicle, maybe I can just come back to you on one of the questions here. So what are the obstacles to achieving full implement? Oh, no, sorry, let me ask you this question. So how does adaptive project leadership evolve in the context of AI integration, considering the increasing complexities and technological advancements in modern projects?
Oh, that's a big question. I think AI offers the opportunity to navigate uncertainty a lot better if we are to capitalize on it. I don't think we're there yet. And I think this comes back to your comments earlier, Jennifer. I think our focus is a lot on management, which is around control, whereas leadership is a lot more about navigating uncertainty and kind of dealing with those things. So if we start bringing AI into the leadership space a lot more, I think, we need to think about how it can aid that navigation of uncertainty. And it might be scenarios, as we discussed earlier, but I think there's also a role there in terms of innovation, because AI can be powerful in generating new ideas in the early stages, the divergent kind of thinking space. So I think there are spaces where, and that's where I think that the adaptability of leadership comes in how to, navigate those spaces and how to ask the right questions and bring in AI in the right places to be able to then kind of find out novel solutions or alternative ways of moving forward that might be different from the past, as we talked earlier.
And I think I think if there are any academics in the audience who are, working in this space that are kind of prompted by this, then we are looking for, we have a call for papers on project leadership in a changing world, and we'll put the link in chat later.
Yeah, and at the URAM conference, right? So please join us there as well, where we will be discussing about innovating project leadership. So I think that would be great as well.
Yeah. So Matt, Stefan, I don't know if you have any final comments, because I'm just about to kind of wrap up. So just some closing remarks.
Let me just jump in and say, look, I think let me answer the question that sort of skipped across the screen a moment ago, which is how do we get to full digital transformation? And look, it's both a need for people, and it's a need for understanding of the financial implications, and it's a need for utilizing tools like procurement processes, etc. But I guess those are all sort of one way of answering it, but fundamentally I think it comes down to leadership, and it comes down to imagination. There's a lot to be gained from this, and study after study after study after study shows that there are benefits from it, and I suppose those of us that are in the space just need to sort of keep pushing and getting those doing the work to understand.
Thank you. Stefan.
And I might just close with a thought on semantics. And we've talked a lot about AI and machine learning kind of interchangeably, but I think they are two different things. And a lot of the tools that we're using and developing and seeing these days are really machine learning tools. They're large nonlinear function approximation systems that learn how to connect to a certain set of inputs and pattern recognize the pattern and predict what the output should be. I think we're still a fair way from sort of the more, an idea of a generalized intelligence. So, I think we have to be a bit cognizant of some of the hype and the sort of bias that comes in with these tools. And, I think, as I said at the outset, I think they are tools. And I think if they're applied appropriately, they can do great things and be really a support. But we have to be careful about how we use them and conscious of their limitations.